that are coming up that bring the attention to it. And my other fear, as it relates to this change in culture, is that, and its resistance to change, is that that we may have some type of retaliatory thing going on. If, you know, ultimately, you know, with police feeling upset that you know, that these 6 officers have been arrested, and some, you know, folk who in the streets might feel like, well, okay, I can talk back to the police even more than I used to, and the police will have to then reaffirm their position of supremacy, you know, and then be more aggressive and let them know, no, we still in charge. That kind of, so it becomes a very tense thing. Culture has to change. The police culture has to change, and it's not going to change easy. That's part of the problem. But also, we are shocked, our younger generation, and this is why so many younger folk are involved. They're shocked. We're shocked because there's this sense that we've arrived. We got a black president. We can live anywhere we want to live. You know, I can go to whatever school I want to go to if I can afford it. And then to be still treated like nobody, or to be abused or beat down or even shot, you know, in ways that are unreasonable. That's a shock to the brain, especially of a younger generation that grew up with other white folk and feel like this is not the way it should be. And that's why there was such tension when men who fought, black men who fought in World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War, each time when they came back and found that they were just as disrespected as before, that's how some of the major riots of the early 1900s took place in major cities, because black soldiers were coming back and they got decorations and awards and then gonna come back and they still being mistreated. So regardless of how far we've come as a society, there's this racism and there's that shock that comes afterward. And I'm glad that we're shocked. I'm glad that we're responding. Lord help us if we just stop responding at all. The fact that we continue to respond, I think, is a good sign. Certainly, we want our response to be more targeted and not so negative in the ways that it impacts our own communities. But we do need to respond.
And the other point that I wanted to mention, I think social media has its pros and cons. But also, I am so grateful that we did have the video to know what happened with Freddie Gray, because what if we didn't have that video? So I'm really grateful in that aspect, and so that we can learn from this situation as well as many other situations of what we need to do. It's no easy fix, but we definitely need to be responding and to do something. And it starts on a whole lot of levels. So I'm just grateful for that, because we would not have known.
But you know what else is interesting about that, and like the original question you asked, police police will act differently if they know they're on camera. If they know the dash cam is watching, but as we can see, some of them, they don't care that the dash cam is on, they still did what they did. But at the same time, wouldn't it be an interesting world if people responded differently because they knew God was watching as opposed to the video was watching? And that's you know, when we talk about the presence of God in all of these things that are going on in our communities, there's some folk who are wondering, is God watching this? You know, does God see it? And what role does God play in all of this? But I think that if we had a society and a community and a world where we were more concerned, or more concerned about the fact that God is watching, I think that would in itself have an impact.
But I think that plays a role as far as we're concerned, being God's hands and feet, and doing the things that are necessary to get these things off the ground and make sure that, you know, he has a say in this. And I think that, you know, the things that all of us are involved in and trying to do for the community speak to the need for God to have a voice in this. So,
That is very, very beautiful. Very well said. And what I want to, something came to me while we were talking. I have written this paper. I did urban ministry in college, and I did a quote that we must not get comfortable in all our accomplishments, but understand there's still more work to be done. And like you said, you know, we feel that we have arrived because we are a part of something in another culture, but understand that when something like this happens, it makes us do a reality check and say, wait a minute, have we really arrived? Because we have been able to accomplish so much, and then we get comfortable, you know, in our accomplishments. So, again, we need to be shocked to understand that, well, maybe we need to take another look and be more still concerned. It's okay to socialize. Not saying that you desocialize, but understand that we do live in this society that still sees colors, and those are barriers, and those are separations, and understand that, you know what, I still got to be concerned about my community, even though I live over here. But I have a responsibility to my community, because when something goes down, it's my community where I'm going to run back to. Like this, like this. All right.
I think that the scripture that you quoted from the 2 Chronicles 7:14 speaks to us humbling ourselves. And I think that with the civil rights movement of the 60s, unfortunately, we thought we had arrived. And what happened was people got comfortable and they stopped marching. They stopped pushing the envelope. And so while we stopped pushing the envelope, behind the scenes, the war was still waging, but the war was being waged for the future. And while we were in that present, saying, you know, we were celebrating and happy that we no longer had segregations and counters where we couldn't, in different water fountains and those type of things, the powers that be had another plan going on, and unfortunately, it is now this generation that is feeling the brunt of what's going on. So we can never stop. We have to always stay in the moment and constantly try to be a vehicle for change.
Well, the next question I want to pose is, and we kind of touched on all these, so we can revamp and go back and say, how easily can this very dilemma take place here in Indy if it hasn't already?
Well, I, at least from my standpoint, it has already happened. We had in the 80s Michael Taylor, handcuffed behind his back in a police car, being taken to the police station, and for all intents and purposes, it was said that he shot himself. He somehow got a hold of a gun after being frisked and searched and handcuffed, and you know the procedures that they go through before they put you in a police car. At least I'm sure most black men do. They're going to make sure you don't have any sharp knife. They turn your pockets in and out, whatever. But they said somehow they missed the gun, and he was handcuffed behind his back, and he shot himself.
I remember that. They said it was in his shoe.
Something like sock or something. It just, unfortunately, when those things happen, you know, the outrage is great for as far as the community is concerned to come out or what have you, but we have to be more invested in the transparency of the procedures of going through and finding out. Trayvon Martin's mom came out and said some wonderful things about because people were celebrating in Baltimore, talking about, hey, you know, this is, you know, this is over, they've been charged, what have you. There are a lot more steps that have to go through. You know, Mr. Zimmerman was charged as well, and he's at home now. You know, so we can't get happy. And here in Indianapolis, we've got to understand that we are just a step away from these type of things happening, and we have to make sure now. You know, Mr. Height, I think, is doing a very good job. The police chief, Rick Height, I think he's doing a great job. We have some city county councilmen, Mr. Vaught Osley, I think he's doing a wonderful job because they're speaking to our concerns. But unfortunately, just like in Baltimore, you have a mayor, you have a police chief, you have the prosecutor that are black, and as you said earlier, the president is black, and we still have this underlying problem. So it's definitely systemic. And so we have to really get to the heart of the matter and make sure that here in Indianapolis, these type of things, we have to be proactive and make sure that they don't happen in the future, and the only way to deal with that is to deal with them now. So.
No, well, I don't want to sound dramatic, but I don't want us to underplay the fact that we're involved in a race war.
Yes.
Okay, to a large degree, it is under the surface. It's not, on the surface. It's under the surface, and it's undergirded by various ideals and values that we hold on to, whether they be again expressed outwardly or held within. That blacks are inferior and whites are superior. That is a mindset that exists, whether we want to admit it or not. And so we're at war. And whether or not the police chief is black, the mayor is black, the state's attorney is black, that's probably more, an atmosphere to create conflict than not.
Wow.
To give you an example,
Absolutely.
when President Obama became president,
Yes.
white supremacist groups increased tenfold. You would think that something like that would create more harmony.
Right.
But it created more racism. These groups that were faltering, falling out of existence, he became president and now they're booming. So that says that there's a problem. Yeah, it's scary.
Yes,
And so again, when you see blacks rising in positions of leadership in cities and government and in business, in athletics, wherever it is, that there's a backlash, there's a tension that is created, and that tension has to go somewhere. And so I'm saying that that's part of the problem. Well, I'm engaged in a campaign too, another campaign, and that is to repudiate white Jesus. And I've been talking about this for the last couple of months, but we're really about to kick it off officially at the end of the month. Now, some people listen to that, and it strikes as strange. Because it's like, what white Jesus got to do with this? Well, what white Jesus ain't got to do with it? Think about it this way. Is there any image you can think of that better represents white supremacy and systematic racism than white Jesus? And let me tell you why. Because if I look at white Jesus, which is irrational because people in that time, in that place, were not white.
From that area.
Yeah, we live in a time now where we know they wasn't white. We know, everybody will agree Jesus wasn't white. We all agree with that. And we even have evidence that not just academic evidence, we have actual genetic and archaeological evidence that shows that folk back then were black folk.
Yes.
They were like us, they looked like us.
Yes.
So, the only reason to hold on to white Jesus is for racist purpose. And if I believe that white Jesus is white, even though we know that God was not physical, we say God is white. If daddy is white, if the baby is white, rather than daddy is white. So we are tacitly saying that God is white. That's what we're affirming every time we utilize the image of white Jesus.
Okay.
And so today, in this day and time, in 2015, to use a white Jesus can only be for racist purpose. You can say, well, this is because it's what we used to. Well, get rid of it. White used to, that don't mean nothing. Now, when we accepted Christ, we thought he was white. I did. That wasn't a problem.
I did too.
But now that I know he's black and we begin to talk about that, folk get real defensive about their white Jesus.
Yes, they
Well,
do.
why? Because you have a problem with blackness. That's the other part of the problem. And if you have a problem with black Jesus, how can you not have a problem with black Enrique, black Tammy, black everybody else? If you have a problem with blackness, that means you have a problem with every black person, no matter how many friends you were in gym with, when you were in school, or swam with in the pool, or whoever's married to who in your family. That ain't got nothing to do with the fact that you got a problem with blackness, and you can be black and have the same problem. You see where I'm coming from? And I know I'm talking too much, but the point is,
That's powerful, bro.
yeah,
Powerful, bro.
this white Jesus thing strikes people strange and makes folk uncomfortable, but the reality is we got to dispense with that image as a very intentional and affirmative way to say that we ain't down with racism. And there's no other symbol that you can dispense with in the world other than white Jesus that will send a powerful message against racism. There's no other symbol you can give it. You can talk about the swastika, you can talk about the Confederate flag, but if those went out of existence, they won't send a message. Because they only are utilized by those who already affirmed their racism. The power of white Jesus is that you can affirm that image and not even know you're affirming racism. But if you make an intentional effort to say, I dispense with that image, you have made a straight up, strong message, sent a message that says, no, I am seriously getting rid of white supremacy and I'm beginning with this image. And I'm embracing the fact that if God made folk black, if God made Jesus black, who am I to question that? Why can't I embrace it? If it was good for God, why can't I embrace it?
Right.
So that's part of what we need to do. If we are at war, And we need to admit that and own that, because we can't come out of it unless we realize we're in a fight. The African proverb that says, a person who will not admit his illness cannot hope to be healed. It's a very powerful reality. We have a problem of racism, and we expect to be healed from it just by talking about it. But you got to take a prescription. You got to change your diet. You got to do certain things in order to be healed.
That is beautiful. That's very well said.
You made some excellent points, and it takes me back to my childhood when I watched Good Times. And when Florida was talking to Jesus, and she looks at the picture. And so as a kid growing up in the 70s, you look at that and you're just like, well, then now I look at Good Times. And when she turns and talks to the white Jesus, I now know the truth.
You know the truth.
And so I do agree that, we've got work to do.
We got a lot. And I think that, because something was pulled out of me, is that what do we do? And I know when we look for solutions, we're looking for these grand solutions and a ball to fall and poof,
That's all right.
fixed. But we have to start with admitting what's wrong. And when we get these things, when like Pastor Nick and bring up these subjects that are so touchy to us, as far as the image of the white Jesus, because Jesus holds strong values. So if they said that Jesus was white with this value, then we are the ones that can run this, because ours was, you know what I'm saying? So when we begin to dismantle those things, we have to admit, oh, okay, that was error. And I can feel proud of who I am. And once I can feel proud of who I am, then now I can take responsibility. But as long as you don't know who you are and what you represent, you will not take responsibility of your own community.
That's right.
Because we'll say, it's not my problem. Fathers, black dads, it's not my problem, because the system won't allow me to be an active man. So my children are not my problem. See how that stems and breaks down our community. So come to admit, accept what was taught to us is wrong, so that we can begin to fix the solution to our community. All right. Okay.
And I just think too that people have to be ready for the truth. And when you start speaking the truth, many don't want to hear that.
They don't want
to learn the history.
No.
They don't want to hear the truth. But it's important.
It is very important.
So that we can begin to heal.
Yes.
And get back.
Yes. When I begin to get information, I begin to heal. I'm like, oh, I don't have to receive that.
It's never too late.
Wow, let me straighten up my back. Yeah, I can do this and I can do that, and I don't need that to incorporate this.
I'm still learning.
Yes.
We
Yes. This is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I'm gonna move on to our last question. I think we're doing a beautiful with our community, expounding on some things, and our voices need to be heard. Okay, from a biblical perspective, and when I read 2 Chronicles 7:14, that's the angle. Are we depending on God to help guide our community in finding solution to the problems we face, such as this one? And I'm going to bring up something where again, that book, The Black Church in America, the church was the voice. And that's where our dependency came, be saying that the church was our voice to speak to our community issues. Do we depend on that voice anymore to help guide us in our community?
Well,
I know.
the answer is, in terms of should we, yes. Do we, no.
Okay.
But it's interesting, the quote that you read by John Beatty speaks to an understanding that this world that we live in is a physical manifestation of spiritual realities.
Yes.
Or to say it another way, that this world offers us options to see God. let me say it this
Okay.
way, when we hear the birds sing, when we see the trees, bloom with
Okay.
life, and
Yeah.
the wind, the word for wind is in the Bible is the same word for spirit, ruach.